The wrench slipped from Roy's hand and clattered against the metal floor. He cursed under his breath and wiped the grease from his fingers onto his already dirty work pants. The atmospheric processor in front of him hummed and wheezed like an old man struggling to breathe. Another part ready to fail. Another long night of repairs ahead. Roy Hendricks had been fixing broken machines on Colony Station Hadrius for 3 years now. The station sat on the edge of Tauran IV, a planet where the air could melt skin and the rain burned through metal. Nobody came here by choice. They came because the pay was good or because they were running from something. Roy was both. He picked up the wrench and returned to work. The processor's fan blades were covered in acid residue from the last storm. He would need to replace them before the next one hit. According to the weather monitor on the wall, that would be in about 4 hours. The alarm started blaring before he could finish the thought. Red lights flooded the repair bay. The automated voice echoed through the empty space. Warning, Class 5 acid rain event approaching. All personnel must shelter immediately. External operations forbidden. Warning. Roy dropped his tools and ran to the window. Dark clouds rolled across the sky like an ocean wave made of poison. Lightning crackled between them, turning everything green and purple. The wind was already picking up, throwing dust and debris against the station's outer walls. He turned to head for the shelter when he heard it. A sound, high and thin, almost like crying. Roy stopped and listened. The alarm kept blaring, but underneath it there was something else. Something alive and in pain. He should ignore it. Protocol was clear. When the storms came, you sealed yourself inside and waited. Going outside during acid rain was suicide. The protective gear could only handle so much before it failed. The crying grew louder. Roy made a decision he knew was stupid. He grabbed his environmental suit from the locker and started pulling it on. The heavy fabric was designed to resist the acid for maybe 30 minutes. Maybe less if the storm was bad. He sealed the helmet and checked the oxygen levels. Full tank. Good. The airlock hissed as he stepped inside. Through the thick glass, he could see the storm getting closer. The first drops of rain were already falling, leaving smoking holes where they hit the ground. The outer door opened and Roy ran into hell. The wind hit him like a physical force, nearly knocking him down. Rain hissed and spattered against his suit. He could hear it eating away at the protective coating already. The crying sound was coming from somewhere near the station's east side, past the emergency generators. Roy ran, his boots splashing through puddles of acid that steamed and bubbled. His faceplate was already getting spotted with rain, making it hard to see. He wiped it with his glove and kept moving. There, behind a stack of old supply crates, a small shape huddled against the wall, trying to hide from the rain under a piece of torn metal sheeting. The metal was already dissolving. The creature beneath it was white. Pure white like fresh snow, with scales that caught the lightning and reflected it back. Roy had never seen a Drivari in person before, but he recognized one from the station's database. Dragon-like aliens from the inner systems. Powerful, dangerous. This one was small, though. A baby. Its scales were blistering where the rain touched them. Pink eyes stared up at Roy with terror and pain. Someone had left it here to die. Roy did not think. He stripped off his thermal coat and wrapped it around the creature. It made a sound like a broken whistle and tried to pull away, but it was too weak. He scooped it up and ran back toward the airlock. The storm was fully overhead now. Rain fell in sheets, turning the ground into a smoking wasteland. Roy's suit was starting to fail. He could feel warmth on his shoulder where the acid was eating through. His faceplate cracked with a sharp snap. The airlock was 20 meters away, then 10, then 5. He threw himself inside and slammed his fist on the door control. The outer door sealed shut just as his faceplate shattered completely. The decontamination cycle started immediately, spraying them both with neutralizing chemicals. Roy collapsed to his knees, still holding the small creature against his chest. It was shaking, crying softly. He could feel its rapid heartbeat through the coat. The inner door opened and Roy stumbled into the repair bay. He carried the creature to his workbench and gently set it down. The thermal coat fell away, revealing the damage. Burns covered its white scales in angry red patches. Some were already starting to bleed. Roy grabbed his emergency medical kit and started working. He had basic training from his military days, enough to treat burns and shock. He sprayed medical gel on the worst wounds and wrapped them in clean bandages. The creature whimpered but did not fight him. "It's okay," Roy said softly. "You're safe now. I've got you." The creature's pink eyes watched him. There was intelligence there. Understanding. It made a soft chirping sound. Roy found a heat lamp and set it up near the workbench. The creature curled up under the warmth, its shaking slowly subsiding. He gave it water from his bottle, letting drops fall into its mouth. It drank gratefully. Outside, the storm raged on. Acid rain hammered against the station's walls. Lightning turned the world white and green. But inside the repair bay, it was warm and safe. Roy pulled up a chair and sat down next to the creature. He was covered in acid burns himself, his suit ruined, and he had probably just violated about 15 different safety protocols. Commander Okonkwo was going to be furious. He looked at the small white creature sleeping under the heat lamp. Its chest rose and fell with steady breaths. Someone had thrown this life away like garbage, left it to die in the worst way possible. Not on his watch. Roy reached out and gently touched one of the unbandaged scales. It was warm and surprisingly soft. "You're going to be okay," he whispered. "I promise." The creature made a small sound in its sleep, almost like it understood. Outside, the storm continued to scream. Inside, something new was beginning. Sunlight streamed through the repair bay windows when Roy opened his eyes. He had fallen asleep in his chair, still wearing his ruined environmental suit. Every muscle in his body ached. The acid burns on his shoulder and arm throbbed with a deep, angry pain. Movement near the workbench caught his attention. The small white creature was awake, sitting upright and watching him. Its pink eyes were bright and alert. The bandages Roy had applied during the night were still in place, though some had shifted. The burns underneath looked better. Not healed, but not getting worse. Roy slowly stood up, trying not to startle the creature. "Hey there," he said quietly. "How are you feeling?" The creature tilted its head, studying him. It made a soft chirping sound. Roy's stomach growled loudly. He had not eaten since yesterday afternoon. He walked to the small storage locker where he kept emergency rations and pulled out a protein bar and some dried fruit. The creature watched his every move. "You hungry?" Roy broke off a piece of the protein bar and held it out. The creature leaned forward, sniffing the food. Its small forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air. After a long moment, it carefully took the piece from Roy's hand and ate it. The creature made a pleased sound and looked at him hopefully. Roy smiled. "Yeah, it's not great, but it'll keep you alive." He broke off more pieces and fed them to the creature one at a time. He also gave it water, which it drank eagerly. While the creature ate, Roy examined the wounds more carefully. The white scales were delicate, almost translucent in the morning light. The burns were healing faster than he expected. Maybe the species had good natural recovery. That was lucky. A beep from the communication panel interrupted them. Roy walked over and pressed the button. Commander Patricia Okonkwo's face appeared on the screen. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Hendricks, you there?" Her voice was stern. "I saw you violated storm protocols last night." Roy winced. "Yes, ma'am. I can explain. I'm sure you can. Report to my office immediately. Commander, I need to tell you something first. I said immediately, Hendricks." The screen went black. Roy looked back at the creature. It was watching him with those intelligent pink eyes. He could not leave it alone, not yet. He grabbed a clean thermal blanket and made a comfortable nest on the floor, then gently placed the creature inside. It settled down without protest. "I'll be back soon," Roy promised. "Stay here and rest." The walk to Commander Okonkwo's office took 10 minutes. The station was waking up, with workers heading to their shifts and the cafeteria starting to serve breakfast. Several people stared at Roy as he passed. He was still wearing his damaged suit and probably looked half dead. Patricia was waiting in her office, arms crossed. "Sit down and explain why you nearly killed yourself last night." Roy sat and told her everything. The crying sound, the creature, the rescue. Patricia's expression shifted from anger to concern to something close to fear. You brought a Dravari hatchling into the station? She leaned forward. Do you have any idea what you've done? I saved its life, Roy said simply. You may have started a diplomatic incident. Patricia pulled up files on her computer and turned the screen toward him. The Dravari are one of the most powerful species in this sector. Their warrior culture, very traditional, very proud. What does that have to do with? That creature is albino, Roy, I can tell from your description. Albinism is considered a genetic defect among the Dravari. A curse on their bloodlines. Patricia's voice was grave. They abandon albino hatchlings on death worlds like this one. It's tradition. It's been their way for thousands of years. Roy felt anger rising in his chest. They left a child to die in acid rain. According to their culture, it's not murder. It's natural selection. That's barbaric. That's their law, Patricia said. And there's more. A Dravari diplomatic vessel detected the hatchling's distress beacon before it was destroyed. They're already on their way here. They'll arrive in about 6 hours. Roy stood up quickly. What will they do? They'll want the hatchling back. Or they'll want to finish what they started. Patricia's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry, Roy. I know you were trying to do the right thing. But this is bigger than one life. No, Roy said firmly. It's not. He left the office before Patricia could stop him. His mind was racing as he hurried back to the repair bay. 6 hours. That was all the time he had to figure something out. The creature was awake when he returned, trying to stand on shaky legs. Roy knelt down beside it and helped steady it with his hand. The creature leaned against him, making soft sounds. They're coming for you, Roy said quietly. Your people. They want to take you away. The creature looked up at him. Those pink eyes held something Roy recognized. Fear. The same fear he had seen when he found it in the storm. Roy made a decision. He pulled out his personal datapad and started searching through galactic law databases. There had to be something. Some law or regulation that could protect the creature. He read through files on sentient rights, abandonment laws, custody regulations. Hours passed. The creature stayed close to him, sometimes sleeping, sometimes watching him work. Roy barely noticed the pain from his burns anymore. He was focused completely on finding an answer. Then he found it. The Galactic Accord for Sentient Rights, Section 47, Subsection 12. Any being abandoned on a death world could claim sanctuary with their rescuer. It was an old law, designed to protect crash survivors and refugees. But it might apply here. There was a catch, though. The being had to choose their guardian. They had to show clear preference and understanding. Roy looked at the creature. It was so young. Could it even understand what was happening? As if sensing his thoughts, the creature moved closer and pressed against his leg. It made a sound, almost like a purr. Roy gently stroked its head, careful to avoid the bandaged areas. If they ask you to choose, he said softly, I need you to pick me. Can you do that? The creature looked up at him and made a chirping sound that almost sounded like agreement. The communication panel beeped. Patricia's voice came through. Roy, they're here. The Dravari ship just docked. They're demanding to see the hatchling now. Roy took a deep breath. Tell them we're on our way. He looked down at the small white creature. Ready? The creature pressed closer to him. Together they walked toward an uncertain future. The main hangar echoed with the sound of heavy footsteps. 3 Dravari walked through the entrance, and Roy understood immediately why people feared them. Each one stood over 7 feet tall with scales that looked like armor plating. Their eyes glowed with an inner fire, and their movements carried the grace of natural predators. The leader was massive, with bronze scales that caught the hangar lights. He wore formal diplomatic markings across his chest. Behind him came a smaller Dravari with green scales and medical symbols, and a third with blue-gray scales who carried himself like a politician. The small white creature pressed against Roy's leg, trembling. Roy kept one hand on its back, feeling the rapid heartbeat beneath the scales. Commander Okonkwo stepped forward. Welcome to Colony Station Hadrius. I am Commander Patricia Okonkwo. This is Roy Hendricks, the mechanic who rescued the hatchling. The bronze Dravari's eyes fixed on the small creature. Something flickered across his face. Disgust maybe, or shame. I am High Commander Dravis of the Warrior Caste. This is Physician Salith and Envoy Kieran. We have come to reclaim what belongs to House Veyrath. The hatchling is not property, Roy said before he could stop himself. Dravis turned his burning gaze to Roy. You know nothing of our ways, human. The creature you harbor is a genetic aberration. Its existence is an insult to its bloodline. Its existence is a life, Roy shot back. And where I come from, we don't throw children away because they look different. Roy, Patricia warned quietly. Physician Salith stepped forward, her movements more careful than the commander's. May I examine the hatchling? I need to verify its condition. Roy hesitated, then nodded. Salith approached slowly, keeping her movements small and non-threatening. The hatchling shrank back, but Roy whispered reassurances. Salith's examination was quick and professional. She checked the bandages and the healing burns. You treated it well, Salith said, surprise in her voice. The burns are healing properly. It should survive. That was always the plan, Roy said. Dravis made a sound like grinding stones. Its survival changes nothing. The hatchling was abandoned according to ancient law. What should have died will still die. We will complete the ritual properly this time. The hatchling made a frightened sound and tried to hide behind Roy's legs. No, Roy said flatly. I won't let you. You have no authority here, human. Actually, Roy pulled out his datapad. I do. The Galactic Accord for Sentient Rights, Section 47, Subsection 12. Any being abandoned on a death world can claim sanctuary with their rescuer. The hatchling has that right. Envoy Kieran's eyes narrowed. That law applies to crash survivors and refugees, not to ritual abandonments. The law doesn't specify, Roy argued. It says any being. This hatchling was left to die on Torin IV. That makes it eligible. The creature is not a legal citizen of the Dravari Empire, Dravis growled. Genetic aberrations have no legal standing. Then it's not your property either, Patricia interjected smoothly. If the hatchling has no legal standing in your empire, you have no legal claim to it. Dravis stepped forward, his size suddenly very threatening. Do not play word games with me, Commander. We are talking about tradition that stretches back millennia. We're talking about murder, Roy said, not backing down despite his fear. You can dress it up in tradition and ritual all you want. You left a child to die in acid rain. The hangar fell silent. Even the normal sounds of the station seemed to fade. Dravis stared at Roy with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Then something unexpected happened. The hatchling moved out from behind Roy's legs. It stood between Roy and Dravis, its small body shaking but its head held high. It opened its mouth and spoke. Stay with Roy. The words were broken and halting, spoken in heavily accented Standard Galactic, but they were words. Clear and unmistakable, everyone froze. It speaks, Salith whispered, her eyes wide. It should not be able to speak yet. Hatchlings don't develop language for months. The hatchling looked up at Roy, then back at Dravis. Roy, saved. Me. Roy. Kind. Want. Stay. With Roy. Dravis looked like he had been struck. Kieran's mouth hung open. Even Salith seemed shaken. This is impossible, Kieran said. Albino hatchlings are not intelligent enough to bond. They certainly cannot learn language this quickly. Maybe your assumptions about them are wrong, Patricia said quietly. Roy knelt down beside the hatchling and put his hand on its back. The creature leaned into his touch, still watching the Dravari with wary pink eyes. Dravis recovered his composure, but something had shifted in his expression. A few words do not change law. The creature still belongs to House Veyrath by blood. The creature just expressed clear preference for Roy Hendricks as guardian, Patricia said, under the sanctuary law that establishes legal custody. We do not recognize this law, Dravis said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. The Galactic Council does, Patricia replied. And you signed the original treaty that established it. Dravis was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerous. You are making a grave mistake, Commander. You are harboring what we consider genetic contamination. You are interfering with our sacred traditions. I'm protecting a child, Roy said. If that's a mistake, I'll make it every time. Dravis turned to his companions. They spoke in their own language, harsh sounds that Roy could not understand. The conversation was heated. Salith seemed to be arguing with Dravis while Kieran looked uncomfortable. Finally, Dravis turned back to them. We will take this matter to the Galactic Council for arbitration. They will decide if your law truly applies to ritual abandonment. Until then, the creature remains here under your custody. And after the council decides? Patricia asked. Dravis's smile was cold. If they rule against you, we will take what is ours. and there will be consequences for those who interfered. He looked directly at Roy. Severe consequences. The three Dravari left the hangar, their footsteps echoing away. Roy let out a breath he did not know he was holding. The hatchling collapsed against his leg, exhausted from standing up to beings 3 times its size. Patricia put a hand on Roy's shoulder. You just picked a fight with one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. I know, Roy said, gently picking up the hatchling. It curled against his chest, making soft sounds of relief. Was it worth it? Roy looked down at the small white creature in his arms. Those pink eyes gazed up at him with complete trust. Yes, he said without hesitation. Yes, it was, Patricia nodded slowly. The council hearing will take weeks to arrange. Use that time to prepare. If you're going to fight this, you need to be ready. Roy carried the hatchling back to the repair bay. As they walked through the station, he could feel other workers watching them. Some looked curious. Others looked worried. A few smiled. Back in the safety of the repair bay, Roy set the hatchling down in its nest. It immediately curled up, clearly tired from the confrontation. You were very brave, Roy said softly. Speaking up like that. The hatchling looked at him. Saved Roy, too. Roy felt something warm spread through his chest. The creature was trying to save him, the same way he had saved it. We'll save each other, he promised. Deal? The hatchling made a sound that might have been agreement and closed its eyes. Roy sat down and started researching. He had weeks to build a case, weeks to find every law and precedent that might help, weeks to prepare for the fight of his life. He was not a lawyer or a diplomat. He was just a mechanic, but he had something they did not. He had something worth fighting for. 3 weeks had changed everything. The small white hatchling that Roy had found dying in the acid rain was now nearly the size of a large dog. Its burns had healed, leaving faint marks on its scales that would probably never fully fade. But more importantly, the creature was learning. Roy had named it Ash, after the color of its scales in certain light. Ash had taken to the name immediately, responding whenever Roy called. The hatchling's vocabulary had grown from a few broken words to simple sentences. It could understand complex instructions and even helped Roy with repairs now, holding tools in its small claws or pointing out problems Roy might have missed. The station crew had stopped being afraid. People brought Ash treats from the cafeteria. Children asked to pet the white scales. Engineers asked Ash technical questions and were surprised when the hatchling answered correctly, but the peace could not last forever. The message came on a cold morning. The Galactic Council would hear their case in 3 days. Roy and Ash had to travel to Concord Prime, the massive space station that served as the Galactic government's headquarters. There they would argue for Ash's right to choose its own future. Patricia helped them prepare. She arranged transportation on a human diplomatic shuttle and gathered character witnesses. Station workers volunteered to testify about Ash's intelligence and personality. Even some of the other species living on the station offered support. The journey to Concord Prime took 2 days. Ash spent most of it pressed against the window, watching the stars pass by. Roy tried to explain what would happen at the hearing, but he was not sure the hatchling fully understood the stakes. They want to take you away from me, Roy said quietly as they approached the station. Back to your people. Ash looked at him with those clear pink eyes. Not my people. You are my people. Roy's throat tightened. I'm going to fight for you. I promise. I know, Ash said simply, pressing against his side. Concord Prime was overwhelming. The station was larger than some moons, with thousands of ships docking every hour. Hundreds of species moved through the corridors, speaking languages Roy had never heard. Some walked on legs, others floated. Some moved in ways that defied description. Ash stayed close to Roy, eyes wide with wonder and fear. A few Dravari passed them in the corridor and stopped to stare at Ash. Their expressions ranged from shock to disgust. One actually hissed before walking away. The council chamber was enormous. Tiers of seats rose up in a circle around a central floor. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat watching as Roy and Ash entered. At the highest point sat High Judge Antares, a being that looked like living crystal, ancient and wise. The Dravari delegation sat on one side. Dravis was there, along with several other high-ranking members of their government. They watched Ash with cold eyes. This hearing will now begin. Antares's voice resonated through the chamber, somehow both gentle and commanding. We gather to decide if the sanctuary law applies to the case of the abandoned Dravari hatchling. Envoy Kieran stood first. He argued eloquently about cultural sovereignty and the right of species to maintain their own traditions. He presented thousands of years of history, showing how the abandonment ritual had shaped Dravari society. He argued that allowing Ash to live would undermine their entire social structure. Weakness must be culled, Kieran said. This is not cruelty. It is necessity. Our strength as a people depends on maintaining pure bloodlines. The albino gene threatens everything we have built. Several council members nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. Then it was Roy's turn. He stood on the central floor, feeling very small under all those watching eyes. He was not a trained speaker. He had no prepared speech full of fancy words. He just told the truth. I'm a mechanic, Roy began. I fix things that are broken. That's all I know how to do. But Ash isn't broken. I've spent 3 weeks with this hatchling. I've watched it learn and grow. I've seen it solve problems that some of my human colleagues couldn't figure out. It reads at a level that should be impossible for something so young. It understands empathy and kindness. Roy gestured to where Ash sat, watching him nervously. The Dravari say weakness must be culled. But I come from Earth. We call it a death world for a reason. My planet tried to kill my ancestors in every way possible. Predators, diseases, weather that changed from freezing to boiling. We survived not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by working together, by protecting our weak instead of abandoning them, by recognizing that diversity makes us stronger, not weaker. He looked directly at Dravis. You call Ash a genetic aberration? I call it evolution. Maybe your species is trying to become something more than warriors. Maybe it's trying to become wiser. But you're so afraid of change that you're killing your own future. The chamber was completely silent. Ash has intelligence. Ash has feelings. Ash has a right to live. Roy's voice grew stronger. I don't care about your traditions. I don't care about your bloodlines. I care about the fact that I found a child crying in acid rain, left to die by the people who should have protected it. If your culture says that's okay, then your culture is wrong. Kieran stood angrily. You have no right to judge our ways. I have every right to judge murder, Roy shot back. And Terry's raised one crystal hand. Peace. We will now hear from the hatchling itself. Ash stood slowly, walking to the center of the floor. The hatchling looked tiny in the massive chamber. Many of the council members leaned forward to see better. I am Ash, the hatchling said in clear standard Galactic. Its voice was young but steady. I was born wrong. My scales are white. My eyes are pink. My family left me to die because of this. Ash turned in a slow circle, meeting the eyes of different council members. I remember the rain burning my skin. I remember crying for help that never came. I remember giving up and waiting to die. Then Roy came. Roy did not care what color my scales were. He saved me because saving was the right thing to do. The hatchling's voice grew softer. The Dravari say I am weak. They say I should not exist, but I am not weak. I learn faster than normal hatchlings. I see patterns others miss. My difference is not a curse. It is just difference. Ash looked at Dravis. You are afraid of me. Not because I am weak, but because I prove you wrong. If one albino can be strong and smart, then maybe you have killed thousands who could have been great. Maybe the weakness is not in my genes. Maybe the weakness is in your fear. Several council members gasped. Dravis looked like he had been slapped. Ash turned back to Antares. I choose Roy as my guardian. Not because I hate the Dravari, but because Roy saw me as a person when everyone else saw me as garbage. That is worth more than any bloodline. The hatchling walked back to Roy and sat beside him. Roy put his hand on Ash's head, feeling proud and terrified at the same time. Antares was quiet for a long moment. The council will now deliberate. We will return with our decision in 2 days. The chamber emptied slowly. Roy and Ash returned to their quarters to wait. Those 2 days felt like years. Roy could not eat, could not sleep. He just watched Ash practice reading from the datapad and tried not to think about losing. On the second day, they were called back to the chamber. Antares stood, and the entire chamber fell silent. The Galactic Council has reached a decision. The council chamber felt different now. Every seat was filled. News of the case had spread across the galaxy, and representatives from hundreds of worlds had come to hear the verdict. Roy could feel their eyes on him and Ash as they stood in the center of the floor. High Judge Antares rose, crystal body reflecting the chamber lights. After careful deliberation, the Galactic Council has reached a unanimous decision regarding the hatchling known as Ash. Roy's heart pounded so hard he thought everyone could hear it. Ash pressed against his leg, trembling. We find that the sanctuary law does apply to this case, Antares continued. While cultural traditions deserve respect, they cannot supersede the fundamental rights of sentient beings. The hatchling has demonstrated clear intelligence and self-awareness. It has expressed a clear preference for its guardian. Therefore, Ash is granted full sentient rights and may choose Roy Hendricks as its legal guardian. The chamber erupted. Some species cheered. Others protested. The Dravari delegation sat in stunned silence, and Antares raised a hand for quiet. Furthermore, we are extending the sanctuary law. Any genetic outcast from any species may now claim protection under this statute. Cultural practices that involve the abandonment or execution of sentient beings based solely on genetic traits are hereby prohibited under galactic law. Roy could barely breathe. They had won, not just for Ash, but for others like it across the entire galaxy. Dravis stood slowly. His face was unreadable. The Dravari Empire acknowledges this ruling. We will comply with galactic law. He paused, looking directly at Ash. But understand this, hatchling. You may have won legal rights, but you will never be accepted by our people. No Dravari society will welcome you. You are truly alone now. Not alone, Ash said clearly. I have Roy, I have humans. I have anyone who cares more about kindness than tradition. Dravis had no response to that. He left the chamber, followed by the other Dravari representatives. Only Physician Salith remained, watching Ash with an expression that might have been sadness or regret. The journey back to Colony Station Hadrius was happy, but exhausting. Messages flooded in from across human space. Thousands of people wanted to meet Ash. Scientists wanted to study the hatchling's enhanced learning abilities. Media outlets requested interviews. Roy declined them all. Ash needed stability, not fame. When they arrived at the station, the entire crew was waiting at the docking bay. They had decorated it with banners and lights. Children held signs welcoming Ash home. Someone had even baked a cake. Though Roy was not sure if Dravari could eat human food, Commander Patricia smiled as they disembarked. Welcome back, both of you. You made history. We just wanted to stay together, Roy said. Sometimes that's enough, Patricia replied. Life slowly returned to normal. Roy went back to fixing atmospheric processors. Ash helped, becoming better at repairs than some of the human engineers. The hatchling was growing fast, now reaching Roy's shoulder when standing upright. Its vocabulary was expanding daily, and it had started reading technical manuals for fun. 4 months after the trial, Roy received an encrypted message. The sender was listed as unknown, but the header showed it originated from Dravari space. Roy opened it carefully. A face appeared on the screen. Physician Salith, Roy Hendricks, she began, looking nervous. I hope this message reaches you safely. I am contacting you in secret because what I have to say could endanger my position, perhaps my life. She glanced over her shoulder before continuing. I have been studying Dravari genetics for my entire career. The albino trait appears in roughly 1 out of every 1,000 births. For centuries, we have abandoned these hatchlings, believing them to be genetically inferior. But after meeting Ash and reviewing my data, I believe we have been wrong. Salith pulled up genetic charts on her screen. Albino Dravari do not suffer from genetic weakness. They possess enhanced cognitive abilities, faster learning, better problem-solving, pattern recognition that exceeds normal parameters. The trait is not a defect. It is an evolution. Roy felt his blood run cold. How many? Based on birth rates over the past century? Salith's voice shook. We have abandoned approximately 12,000 hatchlings. Most died, but some might have survived long enough to be rescued if anyone had tried. Ash had entered the room during the message. The hatchling stood frozen, staring at the screen. Salith continued, I am not alone in questioning our traditions. There are others like me scattered throughout Dravari society. We have been secretly documenting albino births, trying to save what few hatchlings we can, but we are too few and too powerless. We need help. She leaned closer to the camera. There are currently 17 albino hatchlings scheduled for abandonment in the next 6 months across Dravari space. I can provide you with locations and timing. If you could mount rescue operations, save even some of them, it would prove that Ash is not unique. It would force our people to reconsider everything. The message ended with coordinates and encrypted files. Roy looked at Ash. The hatchling's pink eyes were wide with shock and something else. Hope, maybe. Or determination. 17 more like me, Ash said quietly. 17 others waiting to die. Roy had come to the colonies for peace. He had wanted to escape conflict and responsibility. But as he looked at Ash, he knew those days were over. We can't do this alone, Roy said. It's dangerous. Illegal under Dravari law. We would be kidnapping their citizens. Saving lives, Ash corrected. Not kidnapping, saving. Roy contacted Patricia first, then the other station workers who had supported them, then human colonies across the sector. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people volunteered, mechanics, pilots, doctors, teachers, all willing to risk everything to rescue abandoned hatchlings. They planned carefully. The first rescue would be on a toxic moon called Varus 9, where twin hatchlings would be abandoned in 3 weeks. Roy would lead the team himself, with Ash coming along to help comfort the rescued hatchlings. The night before they left, Roy could not sleep. He sat in the repair bay, checking equipment for the 10th time. Ash found him there. The hatchling had grown so much, nearly full size now. Soon it would be larger than Roy, but in that moment, curled up beside him, Ash still seemed small and vulnerable. Scared? Ash asked. Terrified, Roy admitted. We could fail. We could get caught. We could make things worse. Or we could save lives, Ash said. Like you saved me. Roy put his arm around Ash's shoulders. When did you get so wise? Learned from the best, Ash replied. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars through the window. Somewhere out there, 2 hatchlings were crying in the darkness, waiting for death. But this time death would not come. This time hope was coming instead. 1 year had passed since Roy ran into acid rain to save a crying hatchling. Today he stood in what used to be a simple repair bay and was now something much more. The space had been expanded, renovated and transformed into a sanctuary. 17 albino Dravari hatchlings now called it home, along with the original resident who had started it all. Ash moved through the room with confidence, checking on each of the younger hatchlings. At full size now, Ash stood nearly 8 feet tall, larger even than most normal Dravari. The white scales had grown thick and strong, marked only by the faint scars from that first night. Ash wore those scars proudly, calling them survival marks. Roy watched as Ash helped a small hatchling named Snow with a reading lesson. The youngest rescues were still learning basic language, but they learned fast. All of them did. Physician Salith had been right. The albino trait came with enhanced intelligence. Teacher Ash is very patient, said a voice beside him. Roy turned to see Salith herself. She had arrived at the station 2 months ago. Abandoning her position in Dravari society to work at the sanctuary, she had brought with her research data and a list of names. Other Dravari who secretly opposed the abandonment tradition. The resistance was growing. Ash learned from experience, Roy replied. Nobody forgets what it feels like to be abandoned. The sanctuary had become famous across the galaxy. It was no longer just a hiding place. The Galactic Council had granted it official status as a protected refuge. Donations poured in from dozens of species. The station had to expand twice to accommodate all the support staff and volunteers, but not everyone was happy about it. The door to the sanctuary opened, and Commander Patricia entered. Her expression grave. Roy, we have a situation. High Commander Dravis is here. He is requesting a meeting with you and Ash. Roy felt old fear spike in his chest. Is he bringing soldiers? No, he is alone. Patricia looked confused. He asked for a private conversation. He says it's important. Roy found Ash and together they went to the meeting room. Dravis stood by the window staring out at the planet below. The massive Dravari looked older somehow, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical age. High Commander, Roy said carefully. What brings you here? Dravis turned. His eyes went immediately to Ash, studying the full-grown albino Dravari with an expression Roy could not read. I have come to see what I helped create. You tried to kill me, Ash said bluntly. Why would we talk to you? Because I was wrong. The words seemed to cost Dravis something, and I need to admit it. Roy gestured to chairs. They all sat, though the tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. Dravis spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. I have been a warrior my entire life. Over 300 years of service to the Dravery Empire. I have commanded fleets. I have defended our worlds. I have never questioned our traditions because I believed they made us strong. He paused. Then I met you, Ash. Ash said nothing, pink eyes fixed on Dravis. I have watched you over this past year. Dravis continued. The council required reports on the sanctuary's activities. I read everyone. I saw you solve engineering problems that baffled our best minds. I watched you learn 6 languages in 3 months. I observed you coordinate rescue operations that saved lives across multiple systems. He looked directly at Ash. You have accomplished more in 1 year than most Dravari accomplish in 50. And? Ash's voice was hard, and I began to investigate our history, our true history, not the sanitized version we teach our young. Dravis pulled out a data pad. I found records going back thousands of years. Do you know what I discovered? We used to be different. Before we became warriors, we were scholars, philosophers, artists. The abandonment tradition only began after we encountered a hostile species that nearly destroyed us. We became warriors to survive, and we convinced ourselves that only warrior traits had value. He put the data pad on the table. But the galaxy has changed. We no longer face extinction. Yet we continue to cull intelligence and gentleness from our gene pool. Because we are afraid of becoming weak again, we are trapped by our own history. Roy leaned forward. Why are you telling us this? Because change must begin somewhere, Dravis said. I cannot undo what I tried to do to Ash, but I can help ensure it never happens again. I have been working with other high-ranking Dravari who feel as I do. We are a minority, but we are not powerless, Salith gasped. You are the one who has been protecting my research. The one who prevented the High Council from shutting down my investigations. Dravis nodded. I could not do it openly, but yes. And now I am ready to do more. He looked at Ash again. There is a vote coming before the Dravery High Council. A vote to permanently end the abandonment tradition. It will be close. Very close. But if you are willing to speak to the council to show them what they have been destroying, it might tip the balance. You want me to convince them to change? Ash asked. I want you to show them the future, Dravis replied. A future where we value all forms of strength. Where we recognize that intelligence and compassion are not weaknesses. Where hatchlings like you are celebrated instead of murdered. Ash was quiet for a long time. Roy wanted to speak, to advise, but this was Ash's decision to make. Finally, Ash spoke. I will do it. Not for you. Not even for the Dravery Empire. But for the hatchlings who are still waiting to be born. They deserve better than acid rain and abandonment. Dravis stood and bowed, a gesture of deep respect among his people. Thank you. I will arrange everything. The next month was a whirlwind of preparation. Ash traveled to the Dravari homeworld with Roy at its side. They addressed the High Council in a session that lasted for 3 days. Ash spoke about suffering and survival, about the wasted potential of 12,000 dead hatchlings, about the strength found in diversity. The vote was close. But it passed. The abandonment tradition was officially ended. Albino Dravery would now receive the same rights and opportunities as any other citizen. It would take generations for attitudes to fully change, but the law was a start. 5 years later, Roy stood in an observation deck on what was now called Haven Station. The sanctuary had grown into a full colony, home to over 200 rescued outcasts from dozens of species. Not just Dravari, but any being rejected by their own kind for being different. Ash stood beside him, now serving as the colony's administrator. Other albino Dravari had joined them, some rescued as hatchlings, others who had survived abandonment on their own. Together they had built something remarkable. Thinking about that first night? Ash asked. Always, Roy admitted. He was older now, his hair turning gray, but his eyes were still sharp. I think about hearing you cry in the storm, about almost ignoring it. But you didn't, Ash said softly. You never did. They watched as a ship docked below, carrying 3 more rescued hatchlings from a distant world. A team of volunteers rushed to meet them, ready with medical care and warm blankets and promises of safety. Did you ever imagine this? Roy asked. When I found you that night, did you imagine any of this? Ash made a sound that might have been a laugh. I was dying in acid rain. I imagined nothing but pain. Everything after you picked me up has been more than I dreamed possible. We did good, didn't we? We did what was right, Ash corrected. The good came from that, Roy smiled. His work had changed. He was no longer just a mechanic fixing broken machines. He was part of something larger, a movement that said every life had value, that differences were gifts, not curses, that the true measure of strength was not how hard you could hit, but who you chose to protect. Below them, the rescued hatchlings were being led into the sanctuary, frightened, but safe. They would heal here. They would learn here. They would discover that being different was not the end of the world. It was just the beginning of something better. Roy put his hand on Ash's shoulder, the gesture familiar and comfortable after all these years. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting me save you, for saving me back." Ash leaned into the touch. "Thank you for running into the storm, for seeing me as worth saving, for teaching me that kindness is the strongest thing in the universe." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, another outcast was crying. Another life was waiting to be rescued. Another story was beginning. And here on Haven Station, in a place built from compassion and maintained by love, they were ready. They would always be ready, because some things were worth fighting for. Some lives were worth saving. And some bonds, forged in acid rain and sealed with trust, could never be broken. The sanctuary lights glowed warm against the darkness of space, a beacon for the lost, a promise that no one had to die alone anymore, that no one would be left behind, not while Roy and Ash were watching, not ever again.